Chapter 10. Then Mother Bear turned and wandered off deeper into the forest, and the small group broke out into a hubbub of talk. "Wasn't that amazing? I didn't know you could talk to animals, and it was so easy. Can you believe she reached out and stroked your hair? I want to try it with other animals." Bearman and Grandfather just observed them and smiled. "We're so addicted to our own language," Bearman continued, "that we never stop to ask how other beings communicate. And when we reach beyond animals, it becomes even more difficult. All of your learned beliefs and rational arguments insist on being heard and claim that they are the only ones that have access to what is true. But if we really explore and are able to suspend our doubts, then we're open to discovery. And discovery is exciting and very, very alive." This last statement was spoken with a sense of mystery. When we speak to something that is not an animal, for example, this tree here, then our doubts jump in like a battering ram. Trees can't talk. They have no vocal cords. They're passive and inactive. An animal at least has a brain, but trees don't have brains. So we're almost assaulted by the patterns of our thinking. But if we approach the tree and its communication like a true adventurer, which I have always been, then we're open to discovery. We get in our own way so much that we create our own stupidity. "But how can a tree talk?" asked Father. "The same as Mother Bear," answered Bearman. "It talks to you through your imagination and through your feeling." "But aren't we just making it up?" asked Father. "Many children are taught that, and that is so disempowering. Why don't grown-ups encourage children to explore and to discover for themselves? Believe me, the first time a tree tells you something you didn't really know is quite astounding." Father was very quiet. He seemed to be reflecting deeply on something. His face was flushed, and he started breathing rapidly. "Oh, my God, that really did happen," he blurted out suddenly. "I did talk to a tree, and it talked to me," he said excitedly. "I had forgotten all about it." And then he exploded into tears. "My tree! They killed my tree! My poor tree! And it was completely innocent, and I was innocent too. Why did they have to kill it? Why?" Bearman reached out and embraced Father like a mother bear embracing a small cub, and just held him and rocked him while he cried. His tears flooded out of him as he sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. Chapter 11. A nest of silence embraced the group as Father allowed his deep grief to flow to the music of an ancient waterfall. The birds shushed as a soft wind hummed through the tree crowns. Forest sounds wove the presence of this overpowering feeling through each being and on upward into the openness of the universe. The earth herself vibrated softly as she soaked it up as well. Grief that could have killed the small boy had been held in abeyance until the support arrived for its allowance. And now, as it poured through, it opened up his aliveness into the thrilling vibration felt by all beings as profound aliveness. Father shivered and shook while Bearman held him. A deep stillness finally overtook Father. His eyes opened onto Bearman, then onto each member of the group. A deep and loving softness shone through and embraced them all. The great wall that had separated him from all of life had just crumbled, and an invisible web of feeling now wove them all together. And within that weaving, like sparkling stars, was every speck of existence, all the animals, the trees, the plants and flowers, insects, rocks and stones, and specks of earth, and each breath itself emanated aliveness. and empty desert that Father had thought of as his life had suddenly bloomed and blossomed. And the aliveness of the tiny, much-loved being that he had been when he was born rushed to fill the space and presence of the universe. The stuck and fragmented person that Father had created for his own survival had disappeared. In its place vibrated an unending aliveness connected with the all. Father moved to each person, softly embraced and whispered, "I love you." Bearman and Grandfather whispered something back to him. He then went to the nearest tree and touched and stroked its barky skin. Pressing his body into it, he knew that it also felt the death of his tree so long ago. But Father realized that it carried as well the profound aliveness of his tree, as did every tree and plant and flower and bush. Aliveness was not divided. He was reconnected, deeply pulsating to everything. A song began to emanate from Father, softly, deeply, joyously. Was he humming it? Did it have words? Was that a language? It seemed to come from the very center of his body, from his belly, and it reverberated like the skin of a drumhead. Everyone looked at him. Was he asleep? His eyes were closed or slightly open, but he seemed to be looking inside rather than out. Grandfather and Bearman swayed in rhythm with his soft song, and they seemed to know it, or to recognize it, or else were drawn by it to a place of long, long ago. They seemed to be meeting there, as if an ancient living presence that had long been asleep was gently awakening to a morning song. Where was it? Siberia? Alaska? Peru? Africa? No, it was right here, right now. Earth itself, without distinction as to differentiation. They found themselves in a place without location. The universe was the center of all the extent. Space itself, filled with the energy of profound feeling, thrummed and strummed the eternal rhythm that was the core of aliveness. Aliveness as such, with facets of expression that knew no end. Grandfather and Bearman knew that place well, for they had long lived there. David had tasted it, and Cornelia knew its flavor. Mother knew it intuitively, and Father had just arrived there after long and sleeping blindness, having buried his awareness of it as a means of survival along a cold and unfeeling path that had engulfed him early in his childhood, and through which he had to survive until this new opening presented itself, a place that was safe with people who know love. Chapter 12. I don't understand what just happened. Mother looked perplexed, and her question was addressed to no one in particular. Grandfather looked gently at her. There is much that our thinking mind does not understand. It's a good thing that there are other, deeper ways of knowing in the layering of who we are. He said this with a kind-hearted smile. Mother just looked at him. Grandfather continued, "This dimension around us that people think of as empty space is also a knowing. This place is filled with energy, and we are also filled with the same energy. These two energies know each other because they're not different. But thinking is so in love with seeing that it thinks what it does not see does not really exist. The energy that fills space and that also fills us must be felt rather than seen. And the body feels that energy. That is, unless our thinking overrides what our body feels. And many people have been trained to do exactly that. People who are blind to the felt energies do their damnedest to convince children and everyone else that they also should be blind. They do that by instilling us with doubt about our own experiences unless validated by another person. Mother had some questions, but she did not ask them, intrigued as she was by what Grandfather was saying. We are never separate from that energy that fills space. In fact, that same energy fills everything in the universe. If we blind ourselves to this energy, then we divorce ourselves from our intimate connection to the universe. And it is then that we begin to feel a bit lost. Since our thinking has been the culprit that has divorced us from our connection, we think, or it thinks, that the way to belong is through further thinking. And so we build all kinds of thoughts about things and about ourselves. And then we try to convince others that they need to carry the same system of thoughts, the same patterns of thinking that we've developed. For then at least we can think of ourselves as belonging with those who think similar things. But someone who has not disconnected from the energy of the universe does not need a system of controlled thinking. And they can allow their thinking to run free, that is, to fill itself out naturally into its own natural dimensions. When we do this, we find that no two people's thinking is the same. Then we begin to see and also to respect the individuality of people and their uniqueness. People are not their thinking any more than people are their breath. Thinking and breathing are natural dimensions of being alive, but they are not what identifies our being. At this point, Mother was beginning to get confused, but she held her attention and allowed room for Grandfather to continue. Your husband felt this wonderful energy of the universe when he was a child, both in his new little brother and in that tree that he had come so to love. Mother now felt reconnected to what Grandfather had been saying. When little brother died through a tragic accident and the tree was cut down, your husband thought that he had lost everything that connected him to the universe. He was truly orphaned. Of course, the energy of these two tragedies, one upon the other, were too much for a young boy. And so the grief was held at bay, held in reserve, so to speak, until he had matured enough to be able to allow this energy to pass through him. Whether he held the energy at bay or whether the energy held itself at bay is of course debatable. But since they're the same energy, it doesn't matter what answer we devise. Nonetheless, he was spared this crushing experience, and if he had felt it completely, it may well have destroyed him at the time. So we could say that the energy itself did him a kindness by burying itself, holding itself outside the door of his awareness until he had matured more. But he could just as easily say that he had held it at bay by constantly engaging himself in structured actions, in patterns that occupied his awareness, so that he would not have to face the experience itself. In either case, an intelligence was at work that cared for him, that saw to his survival, and now, surrounded by caring people, the universe saw fit to reintroduce him to this awful event, so that he could recapture the energy that had been involved at that time. And it was a powerful energy, as you have seen. Now he has allowed that energy to flow back into his aliveness, so that his aliveness has suddenly expanded, and it has grown him bigger, much bigger than he had previously allowed himself to be. And as he expanded, he shared some of that energy with us. And as you saw, it was a beautiful, inspiring energy, and we have all grown as a result of his presence here. Chapter 13. Talk, 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 Bearman said with a glint in his eye. Talking is okay, of course, and it does help. But then we need to move again and to travel further into the forest. Grandfather smiled, for he knew Bearman well. Let aliveness flow. Let aliveness keep moving. Let's not get stuck, even in the interesting things. Everyone smiled, and Mother and Father more than anyone. Bearman kept climbing the mountain higher and higher, past large groves of trees, over brooks and streams, along paths that were clearly evident and along trails that were invisible. The small group struggled to keep up with him, especially Mother and Father, but David and Cornelia were elated by the climb, and it was evident that grandfather knew the way and had climbed it many times before. Finally, he reached a plateau just short of the mountain ridge, and here he stopped and looked down. The others arrived one by one and sat around him in a circle. "Look around and see how far you can see," he said. Each person looked around, some standing up to get a better view, and some just turning in the place where they were sitting. "Things look a bit different from here." Father was remembering sitting in his tree and the perspective that he had gained as a small boy and how superb he had felt up at that height. Now imagine what it is like for a bird that doesn't have to find the highest mountain, but can climb on the air itself, a bird that elevates itself from layer to layer of sky, circling and trusting and knowing its own abilities and possibilities. The group was silent, and each one had moved inward into the deeper levels of being and knowing. Now close your eyes and call deep within yourself. Ask if there is a bird that could come to you, a bird that would help you get to really know the qualities that it embodies. Everyone in the small group closed their eyes and were silent, including grandfather and Bearman. "Now," Bearman continued, "greet the bird that has appeared and welcome it. Let yourself really experience its presence. Notice what kind of bird it is, and see also the unique qualities and character of this specific bird that has come to you. Now ask if it would be okay for you to merge into it, so that you can experience it from the inside, and so that you can come to know its own uniqueness." The group was completely silent, but each one exhibited subtle movements of muscle and skin and eyes. If we can take a moment to enter into the deep imagination of each of these people, we realize that David already knows the bird that has come to him. It is a mysterious eagle that seems to have no constraints of time, and it has 3 stripes on each side of its face. David draws a deep breath, exhilarated to see it again, and he's deeply respectful as he greets it. He knows its power and its ability to fly through time. And as he merges into it, it lifts up off the mountain and begins circling higher and higher, letting itself be carried by the updrafts and trusting the solidness of the sky upon which it glides. He remembers having seen through its eyes before, and simultaneously sees the vast landscape from high above the mountain, and at the same time seeing in precise detail the small group sitting in a circle on the ledge, himself included. He understands that there is a vast knowing that lies deep within himself, a knowing that is alive and which can travel, and he realizes that he doesn't know and may never know the full extent to which it can travel. His entire body, his full being, experiences the thrill of flying, and he sees that the knowing of animals is available to him, but at their will. It is something he can invite, but that he cannot force. Chapter 14. Cornelia softly called, "Can a bird come to me, please?" She was expecting something like a finch or a robin while she waited. But what was this sudden thing swirling about her head at tremendous speed, so quick she couldn't even see any detail? Then it landed directly in front of her nose. A hawk, a Cooper's hawk, small but with tremendous speed and agility. It looked her directly in the eye without flinching. She felt a thrill run through her body. "Hawk, is it you?" "It is I, madam," Hawk said very formally. Cornelia felt she was being treated like royalty, and she replied without thinking, "Welcome, Sir Hawk." He was surprised at what she said and how she spoke. She sounded so grown up to herself. She also recognized that she felt tremendous respect for this fine bird. "Would you allow me, Sir Hawk, to become you, although I feel quite unworthy to even ask?" "You are more than worthy, madam," Hawk replied. Cornelia felt herself being drawn gently into the hawk, and suddenly she was looking through its eyes and was astounded at the clarity and precision of everything around. But yet there was something deeply familiar about seeing in this way. Before her thoughts could go any further, with a great leap she found herself up in the air. The soft control she had over where she went, and she went wherever she pointed herself, was exhilarating. But what thrilled her most was the speed, especially in her dives. She shot like a bullet down towards something that was moving below, and then just as suddenly swooped back up, while the small mole at which she had aimed suddenly darted back into his burrow. She felt a thrill of satisfaction and realized she was not hungry, and that the simple experience of her skill was deeply satisfying. Hawk suddenly saw a much larger bird flying above, a curious bird with 3 fine stripes on each side of its beak. She flew toward it and circled it several times. It was a fine bird, but so dreadfully slow. Eagle acknowledged Hawk by dipping its head, and she realized that it also enjoyed her speed and skill. She acknowledged it back and was thrilled at the seriousness of their play. Chapter 15. When Mother closed her eyes, she had no idea what to expect. All she could see was the red-gray of the inside of her eyelids, and she thought to herself, this is kind of crazy. And she kept thinking of different birds, and whatever could it be anyway? Maybe it's a canary in a cage. Perhaps she would see nothing, for she really didn't know how to do this exercise. Then she was startled to hear a very distinctive squeak, and as she looked down in the direction of that sound, she saw a tiny mouse, huddled and shaking in terror. Her first thought was, what in the world is this mouse afraid of? Is it me? Then she saw a big, hungry cat eyeing the mouse, and the mouse seemed to have nowhere to run to. She quickly opened her purse, even though she hadn't been carrying a purse, and said to the mouse, quickly, you can hide in here. The tiny mouse jumped and landed in her purse, and she was left to face the cat. The cat had become quite large, and it looked at her and snarled, licking its lips. Mother felt a sudden flash of terror as she watched the cat. It turned suddenly into a man, and her terror exploded in a great rage. She recognized the man. It was the man who had done things to her when she was a child. She lunged at the man only to discover that she had become a black panther, sleek, coated with yellow shining eyes and ferociously sharp teeth. Without thinking, she tore at the man's throat and then ripped him to shreds. She felt exalted and justified in what she had done. Panting intensely, she opened her bulging purse, and out popped a full-grown dragon who spread its wide wings and invited her to climb onto its back. She was now a woman again, but a woman without fear. The dragon gave several powerful thrusts of its wings and lifted into the air, high, higher still, until the earth was a small round ball below. Then the dragon began circling back down, gently, in ever-spiraling circles, and she could see far below 2 small birds flying in circles and playing together. Mother felt a deep sense of peace and a sense of something old having been resolved. Chapter 16. When Father closed his eyes, as Bearman instructed everyone to do, he began searching the sky for the bird. He looked and saw nothing but clear sky. Although there did seem to be some commotion quite high up, he couldn't tell what it was. He called and called, "Bird, where are you? Can you come to me?" But nothing happened. He called again and again, then began to feel a sense of despair, and even a deep sadness at his failure. Suddenly a soft voice said to him, "It is so good to see you again." Father was almost startled out of his wits, for he didn't know who was speaking. As he looked around to see who it was, he realized that he was high up in the air, and furthermore that he was sitting on the branch of a large tree, and he was shocked at the sudden recognition that he was sitting in the tree that he had known as a child, his tree. Tears came suddenly to his eyes, and he embraced what he could of the tree and cried, "I thought you were dead. I thought they had cut you down and killed you. And here you are, my dear, dear tree." "I have always been with you, whether you were aware of me or not," the tree replied. "And there are some things that cannot be killed, and I am one of them. It is unbelievable that I could be with you again. Yes, you have suffered much loss in your life, but perhaps it has helped you grow. Not the suffering, but your ability to go all the way through it, and to grow from it, and to come to experience this deeper dimension of what life is. Oh tree, oh great tree, oh my dear, dear tree." Chapter 17. Bearman, after instructing the others to close their eyes and to call out for a bird to come to them, closed his own eyes, and also invited a bird to come. However, no bird came. As he looked around, he saw a strange sight. There were oceans and mountains, fields and beaches, islands and forests, and vast stretches of sky. "Is there no bird here that can come to me?" Bearman intoned. There was silence, only the stillness of silence. "Is there no one here, then?" A voice that was at once very soft and deeply booming replied, "I am here, as I have always been." "And who are you?" Bearman asked. "I am the earth and sky and all that it holds. I am that which you have always loved. I am that which has drawn you outward. I am your never-ending quest to discover all that surrounds you, and more," the voice answered. Bearman fell to his knees, his arms outstretched, as if to embrace the all that had just spoken. "You are right. I have loved you deeply, severely. I have wanted to taste you and touch you and hold you and explore you ever since I was born, and perhaps before. I always thought I must come to you, and here you have come to me. Here it is you that has been holding me." Bearman was astounded. "I am always with you," the voice continued, "and as you explore and discover me, you will grow deeper, fuller, wiser, and even more loving. I am that which draws you into your wholeness, and you will pursue me until we are both one and the same." Chapter 18. Grandfather also closed his eyes at Bearman's general request, where he was seated on a fallen log. He gently arrived at a place where he had been many times before. He was seated in a great longhouse in a circle of elders. This was a great council to which he also belonged. Whenever he found himself there, it felt as if he had always been sitting with this circle of wise people, both men and women, and that he had never left it. He looked around the group, although he was very familiar with each of them. He acknowledged their presence and they his, with a subtle nod of the head. Even this slight movement was not necessary, for as their eyes met, a definite energy that was physically tangible could be felt. And even though no words were spoken out loud, a communication happened between them. "I see that your excursion of 6 years ago has suddenly grown into an entire family." This was said with a twinkle in the eye. "Yes, growing must be somehow contagious." "So the one your little beetle rescued has multiplied into 4. Funny how that little car can hold so many. And it's still running strong. What do you put in the gas tank? Fish oil?" "No, I think it is the fumes of your spirits that must carry it." "Yes, our methane is pretty powerful." With this, the entire council broke into laughter. "What do you intend to do with the family here in the village?" asked one of the elders. "What else can I do but trust?" answered Grandfather. "The Great Spirit has governed this family from the beginning, including my relationship with them, one by one. and now all together. And it seems evident that the Great Spirit really wants them to grow. As you all know, I am always intrigued by the way the Great Spirit manages to provide choices for people. Many of the light-skinned ones choose not to grow, of course. They choose to cling to whatever they can find or acquire, thinking that this is attainment. Unfortunately, very few of them have realized that coming into wholeness is the greatest gift, both for themselves and for each other. Some individuals have chosen the path of wholeness, as you know, and they are either greatly revered or else they have been killed by their own kind. I wonder if an entire family can also make such a choice. The circle of elders nodded and murmured in agreement, but one of them, the one who seemed to be the most ancient among them, stood up and the rest fell silent. There is hope, great hope for this family, because of their children. In spite of the parents' relatively rigid patterns, many of which appear to be accommodations to injuries, the children have gone on their own search, and quite successfully, it appears. It's true that the boy had to leave home, but that shows deep courage and trust, and he also returned home and has shown definite concern for the rest of the family. We must also not overlook the fact that from early on he was interested in knowing more about the family dynamics. And his sister, that little ball of fire, managed to come visit us on her own. She's a concentration of integrity and focus. So for the parents to have produced these two children already says much for them. Although we must admit that like most of the light-skinned ones, they were very entrenched in the repetition of their own platitudes, thinking that the repetition of certain words constituted wisdom and maturity. We must await and see what effect this adventure here in the village, especially with Bearman and his explosive nature, has on helping them to delve more deeply into who they are. If they can reach deep enough to gather together the various strands of their alivenesses and begin to see themselves from the true depth of their experiencing, and do this as a family, they would constitute a powerful nucleus in a culture that has long been needing a new point of anchorage. The other elders nodded in unison. "Thank you for your wise counsel," Grandfather expressed while still nodding. "I will return to you often, for you know I value your awareness." Chapter 19. After a timeless period, the group began to open their eyes. Father still had tears in his eyes and had obviously been deeply moved. Mother was exhilarated after her ride on the dragon. David and Cornelia looked at one another and laughed out loud. Bearman was somewhat dreamy-eyed, and it took him a while to focus on the group again. And Grandfather looked at them all with deep approval in his countenance. "You'll never believe the powerful dragon that carried me aloft," said Mother. "It was almost real." By now Bearman was fully present with the group, and he looked at Mother and said, "Don't discount your experience. It was real, very real." Mother was taken aback by his words. "But how could it be real? It was only imaginary," she exclaimed. "Unfortunately, you have learned a very limited view of what is real." "What do you mean? Of course what is real, and what is imaginary, insisted Mother. "If we understand reality not in reference to something external, the way you have, but in terms of the vividness of our experience, then we are the determiners of what is real and what is not. The reality of a vision that guides one throughout life is a very real event, and it is by following our vision that the world is created. We are participant creators of the world that we live in. The path that scientists follow leads them to new discoveries that have not before been real. Are we to discount them because they have not been led by powerful images that guide them? Unfortunately, you've learned to discount your most creative experiences by naming them as not real or only imagination. Such an attitude makes a life unbearably lean." Tears came to Mother's eyes as she listened to Bearman. He continued, "Of course we must be responsible toward others, and not only other people, but all the rest of the universe as we follow our visions. And that is a tremendous responsibility, but also an almost magical gift. For we are all participants in this universe, all people, all animals, all plants, all of existence." "Yes, yes," blurted Father, my tree came to me. It is still so present, and I had thought it was dead, that it had been killed, but it was more alive than ever. It had continued to live in me." He was ecstatic. "I met Cornelia, and she was an awesomely quick hawk," said David. "And David was an eagle, big and majestic, but kind of slow. We flew with each other. What a thrill." Grandfather understood that if this family was really to come together into the profound unity that was possible, it would be Mother that would be the most recalcitrant. David and Cornelia and Father were almost there already. This is the end of Book 6. I am both the reader and the author, Steve Gallegos, and I invite you to continue on with Book 7, Grandfather. Thank you for listening.